Thank you for coming to Reefapalooza and taking your time out of the day to do this. Today we're going to talk about perfect is the enemy of great. We're going to go back in time a little bit and learn some of the things you already learned and reapply them, because I think that we can provide better success for all of us, and especially the people that look to all of us for success. So this is part one, 80-20 elements, fish introduction, QT, and nutritive pollution. If we do this right, we will produce a totally different success path for the people that come after us and even some of the people in the room right now. It's time to take some risks today. We're all seeking a little bit of realness. So you want to hear it out of me as raw as I could possibly give it to you. I'm going to do that. That means that I might offend a couple of people along the way, because we don't all believe the same things, but this should be like a safe room to do that in. We should try to push each other's limits and be okay with it. All right, so why this topic? There is a time and place for the debate of perfect. It's on a forum. If you want to go to a forum and you want to talk about the perfect nitrate and the perfect phosphate, that is a perfect place to go do that. It's also in a Facebook group, and it's also, if you catch me in the bar later on tonight, it's a perfect place to do it because I like to debate perfect. I really, really like trying to find out the absolute end of this thing, but that's not what we're going to do today. But my name is Ryan, and I have been guilty of perfection. That's just part of being an educator. It's also part of my DNA. I just want to know the why of how everything works. And I suspect that if you're here at a reefing trade show and in this room, you are probably also people that like to know why, and similar like-minded as myself, or even watching this on YouTube. But this is also my hobby. So what you've watched is 16 years of me progressing my hobby, trying to perfect it, trying to learn more, apply more, fail more, succeed more. All right, but there's a time and place for easy and universal success, and that's what we're doing today. Some people might look at this maze here and say that that is a pretty boring maze, because it is, man. It's pretty straight through, but it's also easy, and that's what I want for all of the reefers to come. And the reason for that is this is an example of a success rates in relation to skill required. Easy has the highest success rates. The people, if we can make this hobby easy, more people will come out the other side of it. Medium skill drops all the way down to here. And you might say, whoa, that means like 80% of the people are going to fail. And if you know the data, like I know the data, 90% of people don't make it the first year. So this is probably over-representing this, because this hobby isn't easy. It's at least medium skill required, and I think that'd be like a universal yes here. But what if we're required to be perfect? What if the only way that you could succeed in this would be to make absolute perfect decisions in every case? That means like 3% of you will be here. And that would be way too high. In fact, this hobby wouldn't even exist if that was real. So this is cool for the masters. If you're a master reefer, this is a pursuit of perfection that I get excited about. But you got to represent when you're talking to other people, or even thinking about your own tank. Am I really trying to master this tank, or am I just trying to produce a successful tank? And what this is today about is, if you look at that tank right there, and you're like, hey man, that is an option of an example of a successful tank. It took 20% of the time, money, and resources to produce 80% of the results, and you'd be happy with that. That's what today is about. So come along for the ride. And our goal here is actually to change that ratio here, so that we can find an easy path where 80% of the people that make it, because it isn't complicated. The first thing we're going to do is talk elements. Perfect is the enemy of great. In the last 10 years, we've been trying to mimic, Fiji in Minnesota. Every last molybdenum, iron, manganese, all perfect ratios to, match Fiji. Previous to that, it was do some water changes. So where in there is that 20% of effort? Somewhere in between there. We'll find out. And the first question you're going to ask yourself is, are trace elements even of value? That's a debate that could be had. Do I even need to worry about trace elements? And usually it's a bunch of people asking whether it's worth it. They're not actually talking about the biology of the animal. You're not talking about the biology of how these animals actually consume trace elements and the results of it. You're talking about, is it a pain in the butt? Is it expensive? The answer, though, is it is actually easy. And if that's true, why are we talking about worth it? So let's just go do it. Because I know 100% of marine biologists and 100% of marine scientists would tell you that all these trace elements regulate biological functions within these animals that matter. These things will change the results that you produce. And so I'm just going to go with the marine scientists because I feel like they probably know the best. But what I don't have to do is hit exactly. Because if exactly was the goal, this hobby doesn't exist. There's no possible way that we could get everybody in this room and everybody to follow us to hit exact. Approximately. If we just get close, it's good enough. So we're going to start with 2 stars here. So this means, like most of you probably started there, I certainly did. I'm going to dose calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium. All right, mission accomplished. I tested for it. Am I going to be successful? Maybe, but I'm probably going to look like that guy dancing around on top of the dice there. You know, maybe it's going to work for me, maybe it's not. And it's really kind of dependent on whether or not I do everything else right. It's just kind of a gamble. So let's do a little bit better. Let's do proactive water changes. Now we're doing like 3 stars. We're doing pretty good. And by proactive water changes, I mean address the problem that you're trying to solve. Think about the tool that you're going to use to solve it, in this case water changes, and then intelligently just pick what size and frequency I would be required to solve that problem. And then do it proactively. Don't wait until the animals look sick, because you waited too long then. You're trying to prevent that. And the reason that this works is it slows descent of the trace elements. So the trace elements get consumed. We do a water change, and then it will bring it back up. And we do a water, or it falls a little bit more, and brings it back up. It don't bring it all the way back all the way up. It'll kind of seesaw all the way down to a point where it finds equilibrium, where the amount of trace elements that are consumed in a week are actually replenished by that water change. You know, so it will find some floor. All right, that's good. But it also buffers overdoses. You probably don't think about this that much. But those trace elements in your 2-part, the guy that made it doesn't know for sure the amount of iron or manganese or any of those things that you're consuming in your tank. They're just trying to guess. And the reason is because there's all kinds of different animals in there. You couldn't make it perfect. So some of these things could actually be overdosed. The water change will bring it back down. And so in this case, when you're doing these water changes, you're just kind of like fluctuating it back and forth inside of a safe zone. And how frequently and how big, if I did them very infrequent and small, the fluctuation range is really big. If I did them like really frequently, like 10% weekly, it's pretty small. And so we just choose to do that. Also exports impurities. So you don't think about this either. But all these elements came out of the ground. You know, they're all mined out of somewhere, or they came out of a byproduct of a desalination plant or something. They have other things in there when you're dosing them. They're not pure for sake, like 100%. So the water change will just take some of those things out. You know, and it reduces effects on salinity. Most of our additives have excess sodium and chloride. And so when we do the water changes, it accounts for that as well. So all of these things proactively taking the problem, and we're just addressing it with this really simple tool. Now I say simple, it's not anything that anybody in this room wants to do, but it's something that everybody can do if you understood the importance of doing it. All right, so this is an example of no water changes. In a theoretical like 5% depletion, meaning every week like 5% of my iron was depleted. At the end of 20 weeks, I would theoretically have 0. Now it wouldn't actually look like this because at the end of this, what would happen is the animal's biology would be affected and it would stop consuming many of these things. So it would actually level out somewhere lower than 0, but that means the animal's sick. If I did 10% water changes, it looks different. Drops really rapidly, and then eventually finds like an equilibrium where it falls off and stays there. Now you asked me the question, this looks like it's about 40% depleted. My iron is 40% lower than Fiji or wherever that came out of the ocean. Does that matter? The answer is we don't really know, and we'll probably never know. But is this better than none? And the answer is of course, right? So we combine these together. What if we want to do better? Now better, means that we're using a 2-part that has elements in it. This is simple. Most of us are probably doing it, but do you know why you're doing it? So just a complete 1% 7-part, but designed for a system like yours. Now how many people have thought specifically, how do I use one of these systems to match my specific tank needs? What is it about my tank and what is it about the tool that I can pair these together? And most people haven't done that. Most of them are picking this because my buddy Jerry told me to use it, a stranger on the internet told me to use it, or the packaging is particularly awesome. Those are probably the reasons that I'm using these things. But what if I had a refugium? Then Core 7 is great because it's adding extra molybdenum and iron and manganese in there. That's a great one. If I have a space problem, it's a nanotank. Well, then all of a sudden Alpha Reef is a really great option. It's one dosing pump, one cord, one set of tubing. What if I have a pH problem, which isn't really an element, but it controls how elements are actually consumed? Well, Kalkwasser now. With any old trace element option, you could probably pick that matches with it. I'm choosing A and K here from Tropic Marine, but you could use something else. What if cost and flexibility is an issue? Because cost is probably an issue to almost every one of us. Well, now you got bulk two-part. The flexibility is you can add A and K directly to that two-part, and now you have trace elements in there. But what if I'm testing and I'm finding that those trace elements are actually not being consumed as rapidly as I'm adding them? I can add a little bit less now to my two-part. It's adjustable. What if cost and simplicity is an issue? Well, now Reef code A-P is an option. It's just 2 parts. It's simple. And when we tested it for like cost per DKH against all the other 2 parts out there, all the retail ones, it was the cheapest available one to add DKH and calcium to your tank. So, and it's simple. It's got trace elements mixed in this powder. It's just 2 parts. Cost and simplicity, important to a lot of people. Preferably clean. Now clean, I don't mean go out and test your stuff for ICP, because you could do that. You could go watch some videos where you've done that. I'm really talking about if it looks dirty brown, I wouldn't use it. That's just it. Especially because there's other options out there that cost the exact same amount and aren't dirty brown. So I just would probably not use that on purpose. Now the other part of this though is if I ever ICP'd down the road and I found that my elements weren't in balance, I would probably just consider changing out how I'd manage my 2-part trace elements. So it's not necessarily that they're bad, it just isn't matching what I do. All right, so if I did that, I probably have a line that looks like this, which is I am depleted a little bit because most of the additive lines would like to put in, they'd rather underdose than overdose. And I'm doing my water changes and now I'm close. If you imagine that target that we had earlier, it's just, just slightly depleted. And if this isn't enough to be successful, again, this room doesn't exist. There's not any way we could possibly do that. And for that reason, this is the 80 or the 20% of effort that will produce 80% of the results. And like, this is a little bit boring because you're saying, hey man, just do your water changes and do your 2-part. Well, of course. But the reason we're having this conversation is because there's so much pressure to go beyond. And sometimes desire, because I have it. So let's talk about what the next thing looks like. This is 5 stars now. I'm killing it. We're doing it great. I'm going to ICP test. We're going to put the system to the test. We got ICP confirmation it's working, and any legit solution when it isn't. And when I say that, I mean any legit solution. It doesn't mean go dose iron and manganese. You could do that. That could be an option. But it could be just change your water changes. It could also be just change your 2-part to match. But the purpose of this is once a year, I can go test my theory. My buddy Jake told me to go do this. So at the other end of this, did that actually work out? Some stranger told me to do this. Did it work out? Or just on my own, I decided I thought this made the most sense. But did it work out in the end of the year? And not just in terms of do the corals look good, but does the chemistry look good, which is a precursor to the corals looking good. All right. This is, however, as good as that sounds to test your method and make sure it's working. I think this is part of the 80% that produces 20% results, because what do you do with this information? Anybody who here has done an ICP report on their tank, right? A lot. Who here knew what to do with it when they got it? I see like 3 hands, man. So it's just like this report of numbers, man. Like, what do I do with all of this information? It's like, I imagine trying to get like a CAT scan of my body and like trying to self-diagnose if I'm healthy or not. Like, I don't know what I'm looking at. This is the same thing. And it takes skill and effort. And so you are just as likely to, mess this up as you are to fix it. So it is a skill set that I would apply and why I put it in higher, even though I think it's a generally good idea. All right, but now we're going to do perfect. This is like, this is the pursuit of perfection. This is the end of the debate. And perfect is unique to me. Somebody else may say perfect is different, and that's true throughout this entire presentation. But this is what it looks like to me. Ocean-like parameters 24/7. I'm matching Fiji, I'm matching Indonesia, I'm matching whatever, like perfect. My water in Minnesota looks the same as it does in the ocean. 24/7. It's systematically stable, meaning it's not just doing it 24/7, it's doing it every day of the week, year after year, and I've got all the systems and processes in place to make sure that it's always that way. That's a great aspiration, but man, I'm telling you, it's complicated. It addresses bioaccumulation. So your test kit may say, hey, you don't have a copper problem. But what you don't know is that animal actually absorbs copper into its body, bioaccumulates the copper out of the water. It's getting sicker, but you don't have the ability to identify that, and it's just getting sicker and sicker and sicker until one day it kicks it because it's got too much of whatever that might be. So it addresses that. And it's near waste-free. Waste-free, time, money, salt mix, resources of the planet. That's perfect, right? To my knowledge, Triton is probably the first one that ever did this. There are other options out there now, like Reef moonshiners. I see people talk about that. I think ATI has an option. I think that Aquaforest has a similar option to this. But I'll talk about Triton because this is the one I have the most experience with. This is the one I've actually applied myself the most, so I can share my personal experience with this, which was the goal was perfect seawater levels, neither deficient nor poisonous. Absolutely achieved that. Absolutely sent in those test kits every single month. And every single month I would, correct the, potassium or correct the iodine or whatever it was, and it achieved this result. And as long as I did those things, it always worked. It addresses effects on salinity. So what happens in most cases with most two parts is you add that excess sodium chloride. And so the salt, in salinity goes up over time, without water changes. Okay, so what happens there though is you gotta dilute the tank. So if I go ahead and dilute the tank from 8 parts per thousand to 35, 10%, that doesn't sound like much, but that means all of the other elements in the water just went down 10% too. Calcium just went from 420 to 380. Most people would say I care about that. So what this does, Tropic Marin, I think, identified this first with the balling method, and then most people just decided not to address this the same way, for whatever reason. But what they've done is they decided to address it by elevating the elements in the actual two-part to account for the dilution step. The dilution step in their case being run a wet skimmer, and the auto top-off will just replace the water, but you could do it manually as well. It also has a method to test for this. So I don't have to trust the packaging, I don't have to trust my buddy Jerry, and I don't have to trust a stranger on the internet. I can test this with ICP and it says that it actually works. It's very gratifying. It has minimal waste and effort. This was 50-50 for me. I replaced the water changes with a lot of testing and dosing. I did way less water changes, but I still had to do them. Other people may have different results. It supports the desired pH, which again isn't really an element, but it controls how these elements are used. And it doesn't do it in just one way, which is the additive. It's tied to a refugium, which also sucks up the carbon dioxide, carbonic acid, and rates up the pH. It addresses bioaccumulation. Probably not all of the bad things, but that chaetomorpha that's growing in your refugium is soaking up a lot of different things. And you grab a handful of it, throw it in the trash, those things are exported. What it doesn't really do for me, which if I were talking about really truly perfect, is addresses the unknown, and is it really truly proactive versus reactive. What it doesn't work for me is there's so many things that happen in a tank that we'll never be able to test for, we'll never be able to predict, and we'll never be able to manage perfectly, the input and output, perfectly. And so for me, when we ultimately changed away from this system, we kept the Core 7 because it was the right two-part for us. The testing was not right for me. I didn't like doing it, and it was required. Because if we didn't follow what was in that test kit, the results went down. If we followed it, they were good. But ultimately, we just replaced all that with just doing 10% weekly water changes, and we produced the exact same results. So for me, just doing the 10% water changes was so much better than all of this. And also for me, proactive, instead of waiting for a test kit to tell me that I'm doing it bad, I'm just assuming that somewhere I'm going to do this bad, and the water change is actually going to correct for it. And that's why this is the 80% of work that produces 20% of the results. All right, so again, this might sound kind of mundane, but this is the thing that we kind of got to adopt as a hobby, specifically for if you're new to reefing, but also if you're advising others that are new to reefing. Or even if you're intermediate, but you've been chasing the dragon here and not getting the results, you can go back, which is calcium, alkalinity, magnesium. Pick a two-part that actually matches the needs of your tank, not the best packaging. Do some water changes. And if you want to go after near perfect, go ahead and go after that, but it's going to cost you some money, and you're going to balance all the balls, hoping that you get it right. The one thing that this doesn't really address, though, is the people that are doing that at the bottom there, these are the reefing masters. Like, you should respect these people. These people that are actually managing the perfect input or all of the exports of elements in the tank, and they're figuring out the system that matches all of the inputs perfect. This is like almost like a mythical creature. And somehow this person's pulled it off, not today, but they're pulling it off tomorrow, and they're pulling it off 3 years from now. Like, it doesn't always last the 3 years. Sometimes it only works for a couple. But at the same point, man, if they pull it off, they deserve respect because they are doing something that is really, really hard. But the question you got to ask yourself a little bit is, hey, am I just trying to set up a tank that has like fish in it and some coral and looks nice, my family's happy with it, my friends come over and tell me how awesome it is? Or am I trying to climb K2 in the winter with no oxygen and no Sherpa? You know, because I'll be frank, man, I kind of want to do that, but I've also been doing this for 20 years. And so I got to make sure that my advice, matches that, because, consider who you're helping. If what we're going to do is go ahead and tell people that it's that bottom end right there where the only way you'll be successful is if you do all this super complicated stuff, man, we're not helping them. We're actually ensuring that they fail and all the animals under their care are going to die. It's not the goal. The goal is actually much different. So part of this is to be wary of advice that come from those that are not willing to show you the fruits of their success. Greg Carroll shared this with me once, and it's stuck with me ever since, because I hear the best and most perfect way out of so many people that have crappy tanks or don't have a tank, and like that is just not somebody I want to listen to. So Greg, on the other hand, has produced the type of results that I want to listen to. He's in my peer group. I ask him questions. These are the types of people that I have access to in my peer group that I try to assimilate everything that I learn, try it, test it, and then share it with you guys. And that's why we do what we do at BRStv, which is not just share, what we think is the right way, but then go on and build the 160, share its progress for 8 years. Build a ULM, show it for years. Build a clown harem tank, show it for 5 years. We want to share with you guys the actual results of applying this information, good and bad. So in this case, this is 2 months into just doing what I'm talking about, which is I got an auto water change system on there, so it's just automated for me because it'll actually happen then. It won't happen if it's not. And we have calcium, alkalinity, magnesium with bulk, and then we have trace elements with A and K. And again, there's a video on this, but you can just add a little bit of A and K directly to the bulk container and you're done. These corals at 2 months are starting to base out on the plugs and everything. 4 months. 4 months later, this is what that tank looks like. So just give you a time lapse here. This is 2 months in. That's 4 months in. Okay, two things I just saw a bunch of people say. A group of people said, that looks about right. And then another bunch of people said, what the hell, man? I'm not getting that. Okay, the answer is, if you're not getting this, you should consider what you're doing because this is absolutely possible. And then at 1 year, that's what it looks like. So if your tank doesn't look like this at 1 year, you should say, what am I doing wrong here? Because this is absolutely possible, and the people that really know what they're doing can find this. This is at 2 years. Okay, the coral density to water in this tank is really, really high. I mean, it almost looks like there's more coral in there than water, right? Okay, the point of this, though, is if the system here was flawed, this would expose it rapidly. If what we were doing here wouldn't work, this type of tank, man, would expose this so fast because it would be out of balance. It was the water changes that were keeping it in check. All right, so that's why this is the 80% that produces 80%, or the 20% that produces 80% of the results. Simple, easy stuff that anybody could do. You just got to remember to do it, and you got to not stop. For that reason, it only works as long as you do it. When you change your system, it may not work anymore. It's like making muffins every day, and then one day you decided not to use baking soda. It's not going to work. And I like to think also, as much as important as showing the results, It's also showing the failures. Owning your mistakes, because learning from those mistakes is often more valuable from learning what to do, learning not what to do. In this case, this tank kicked the bucket. And I don't like sharing that, but it doesn't matter, you should know. And the reason that this tank kicked the bucket is because we moved it from my office where there was auto water changes into the studio where there was not auto water changes, and we had the best plans that we were gonna put auto water changes on it, and we didn't. And we were doing them manually. It's a business environment, and we just forgot. We just didn't do them every week like we were doing them before. You know what? It lasted a few months, and then it died. One morning on Monday, we came in, and the tank was crashed. And that's painful. But at the same time, there's a lesson here, which is, this is the biggest, probably most important lesson, which is when you buy a dog or a cat, you're committing to picking up after it in your yard or changing out the litter box forever. You're not going to stop doing that ever. So in this case, I'm committing to managing the water forever, or there's going to be a bad result. This is the outcome. So as you get lazy, and it seems like everything's working out and life gets in the way, and then I missed 3 of them, but the tank looks fine, know that you're just 3 more or 10 more away from a negative result, and you could preempt that by going back to what you were doing. So a tank isn't really a laboratory experiment that requires perfection. It's a healthy biology that it can adapt to imperfections, and a good plan stably is all you need. I'm going to do that with water changes and good additives, and that's the solution that works best for me. So next one is fish introduction. Perfect's the enemy of the great. Who here quarantines fish? I don't know, there's 5 of you. Who here has actually considered quarantine before? That's most of you, right? The reason that a lot of people don't do this is because you go onto the forums, and then you ask, should I quarantine? Somebody says yes, 3 people say no, and then all of a sudden whatever a person says to do it this way, all of a sudden they say don't do it that way, and then they say do it this way, and then don't do it that way, and all of a sudden nobody's actually talking to the original poster anymore. They're all debating amongst themselves what is the perfect way to do this, right? And just to lose track, and they're like, this is so complex, no way, I'm out. So versus, let's just do it really easy, see where we want to land. So the heart of this conversation is exactly that. Is QT hard? No, and you're going to find out today. I'm going to show you in 60 seconds why you could do this. Is QT effective? Absolutely, show you that too. Will I be successful? Absolutely. You will not go kill all your animals doing this. You'll improve your results for sure. And what if? Never-ending chain of what ifs. We're going to throw that in the trash. We're going to jump over perfection, and we're going to find some progress. All right, and why are we going to do it? Because I think we can eliminate 80% of the new fish mortalities. I don't like showing the dead animals. I almost never do this. But I think that 80% of the new fish mortalities we could completely eliminate from the hobby. I think that you're going to believe that too in about 10 minutes. And the new fish mortalities are, in my opinion, the predominant place that this happens. All right, so 2 stars. I'm not really going to call it 2 stars, I guess. I don't know what this is, but it's called float and release. You go to the fish store, buy a fish, float it, and then you let it go. Who's done that? Who's done that more than once? Who's done that many times? Yeah, okay. So that doesn't mean it's a good way. And sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. In fact, many of the times it worked out for me. And that's kind of the gamble. As you go onto a forum, you'll see 60 people say it worked out for me, and you'll see 30 that didn't. And you just kind of naturally listen to the people that you want to believe instead of the whole group, right? All right, so good. Here's the good step. Let's take one foot in front of the other one. Good means don't add ick magnets or patient 0 to the tank. 3 stars. So this is your Achilles tang, your powder blue, powder brown. Just don't put them in the tank, man. You got lots of fish to pick from, just don't do this one, right? It's that simple. And it's not because I'm worried about this $200 fish. What I'm worried about is this fish going in the tank, and because it has a weak slime coat and a scale structure, it's super susceptible to this stuff. It explodes in these parasites, becomes a breeding ground for these parasites, die, and all the parasites go attack all the fish and they all die, right? So not only when you put this fish in there are you risking that one, you're risking all of them. And you might even be saying, well, no, I did it. I got one right now. Yeah, we did that too. And then wait for that time that the power goes out or your heater dies and any other stressful event that happens. That's where this one gets sick and then wipes out all the other ones. So it just isn't your turn yet. All right. Good also, same step. use an isolation box. If this was the one thing that you guys got out of like today's presentation, let it be this. Who here has used an isolation box? That's a pretty good number of you. I would say like, maybe 15%. Okay, so the isolation box kind of looks like these. You can go onto YouTube, you can build your own, you can buy them. When you buy them, they tend to be too small, so building your own is kind of cool. But in any case, what an isolation box does is respects what this animal just went through. Now to you, you go to the fish store and you're like, this fish is sitting there, he's living there doing his thing, I'm gonna bring him home, put him in my tank, right? This is what really happened. What really happened is that fish was swimming around in Fiji or wherever, doing his thing, dodging sharks and barracuda and whatever, and then somebody caught him, brought him to the beach, brought him to the holding facility. We didn't feed him for a few days to clear his gut so he doesn't poo in the bag on the way to LA. Goes to LA, sits in a facility that's exposed to thousands of other fish and the same thing. Goes to a fish store, exposed to all that. Goes to your house, you floated it and you released it. And there's a whole bunch of people in that tank, man, or fishes, that do not like him, and they immediately attack him and stress him out. And he's not used to eating the food. He doesn't know where security is. He doesn't know who the bullies are and who is safe. And it is a terrible, terrible thing to do. Or, totally different thing we do. We could put a little isolation box in our tank. You could drop that fish in there. He's now protected from all the other fish in there. Everybody can see and smell each other and get used to each other. He can look through the plexiglass and you can see, where the safe spots are, who seems to be the king of this tank, figure out the hierarchy. We can feed them very unnatural food to them, being whatever it is, pellets or mysis shrimp or whatever it is. He gets used to eating this while he's not competing for other things. And then 2 weeks later, we open the door and it just swims out and enjoys his day. I have never not seen this work, even with tang against tang. I've just literally, it's amazing how well this works. So if only thing, man, we did was this, it'd be major, major project or progress. Every single person should own one of these or build one. It's super easy. All right, better, proactive ick and velvet treatment, easy and a moderate cost. You might be thinking I can't do this. I'm going to show you why you can. All right. Step 1, get a 10-gallon tank with an air stone, PVC, and a heater. No filtration required. You don't have to keep a filter going anywhere, man. We're going to replace this with water changes. I'll show you in a second. You're going to get a 50-gallon drum filled with salt water and a heater, and you're going to use IO purple to avoid medication precipitation. So while I wouldn't use this for a reef tank, it's the exact reason, because the levels are too low, it's the reason that I'll use it for this. And then you're going to mix up that whole 50 gallons to 2.5 parts per million copper with copper power. If you want to do some research, you could probably use a different one. They are different though. I would just suggest you use this one. And then you're going to test it 2 times to make sure. If budget requires, you can use a test kit. I suggest a checker. You're going to fill your tank from that bin. I got 50 gallons. I'm going to put 10 gallons of that into my tank, and I'm going to let the fish swim around. And every 3 days, I'm going to perform a 100% water change. That's why I don't need the filtration. It's because I'm doing 100% water change. What that also does is it gets rid of stress hormone and stuff out of the water, the things you can't test for or know, but fish just do well in clean water, end of story. So we're going to do that in your bin. It's going to be 4 total water changes. Just 4. They're 100%, 10-gallon change takes a couple minutes. So at the end of this, if you can perform a copper test kit, who here can perform a copper test kit? That's 100 out of 100 of you, right? Who here can perform 4 water changes? That's 100 out of 100 of you. That means you could do this. It's that easy, right? This is the 20% that produces 80% of the results. Now there's other stuff you can do, for sure, and we'll get into that, but this is so easy, and this is the first step of learning a brand new skill, and now you can be proud of yourselves of how you're actually caring for these animals and getting rid of the parasites. All right, the big question, the big part of this debate is the medicated QT valuable if there's ick already in the tank? Right? So if I know that ick is already in this tank, should I do it? Because apparently ick's going to get on the new one anyway. The answer is a resounding yes. Yes, 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 all the way yes. And the reason for that is you probably don't have every last strain of ick. You know, did you need to collect them all? Is it Pokemon? You know, there is ick that exists in Fiji. There's ick that exists in Indonesia, and the fish have developed their own immune system responses to different, and presumably some of them are worse than other ones. I don't need to put them all in there. But more importantly, velvet, even though ick might be in your tank, velvet is likely not. And the reason that I know that velvet is likely not in your tank is because if it is, there wouldn't be any fish in there anymore. It's super virulent. You know, it will attack all of the animals in there. It'll probably wipe it out. So what I'm really doing by treating for this is I'm treating for ick or velvet as well. And combined with that, a healthy start of adding a disease-free fish into the tank is just way better than adding a disease start. You know, it's a no-brainer. And on top of that, if I put it inside the isolation box, a lot of places that these fish are actually exposed to these parasites is not swimming around the water and the thing catching it. A lot of the times it's where they sleep in the sand. And that's where the little thorns or whatever hatch, or I'm probably getting that wrong, but the phase of it that goes and attaches the fish is catching it in the sand. But in my little isolation box, doesn't mean it can't happen, it's just less likely to happen, and like the volume of them is less likely to happen as well. And QT, like this, just combines with isolation, good selection, UV, diet and aggression management well, and a starting point for progress. All right, so let's do it even better than that. Now let's talk about great, 5 stars. So this is parasite population control via UV and sediment filters. Some of you probably don't know this, but a sediment filter is just as good as a UV. I mean, I can just pump, most of my water every hour through this sediment filter, and you're probably going to use a big blue one, like a big giant one. But you just catch them in the sediment filter, and they die in there. It's that simple, right? The UV is actually going to catch them and sterilize them, not kill them, but change their DNA so they're not able to replicate anymore, right? It just damages their DNA. Okay, so in either case, what I'm doing now is population control. So ick may very well be in the tank, but it's never going to be there in explosive amounts. Where this really comes into play is, I don't care about your advice, Ryan. I'm going to put an Achilles tang in this tank. This now becomes really, really valuable, right? Because I'm going to keep this down. And I got to tell you that I've done this successfully in many tanks with Achilles and powders and browns. And with the UV, I have never lost a fish. So could you? Sure. But I have not. So that is why, it's pretty valuable. This is where perfect comes into play. Perfect comes into play with eradication. So eradication sounds good. I'm going to make sure there's no ick or anything else in my tank. And despite what anybody tells you, it is absolutely possible. It might be unrealistic, but possible for sure. And if you're a master reefer and this is your goal, I'm going to show you how to do it. You can definitely do it. I was inspired, so it's the best solution, but as a learning curve, time-consuming and expensive. This is endgame hobbyist. So I was inspired by Humblefish in an article that he wrote called Ick Management versus Ick Eradication. Now, he had hit the point where he wanted to eradicate, but the message actually that spoke to me was the management, because most people just close their eyes and hope for the best. What he was doing is saying, no, I'm going to manage the population via UV. I'm going to manage their diet and keep them healthy. I'm not going to add any ick magnets to the tank. And I'm going to make sure that I'm not I'm going to introduce them properly. I'm going to quarantine them properly, and then I'm just going to do everything I possibly can to manage their health. And when I manage their health, they probably won't break out with these things. And I'm that is the message that everybody in this room could do, but is often chastised as not good enough. And then you just end up doing nothing, right? All right. So that said, Humblefish here has 22,000 posts. He represents endgame hobbyist. He may even be beyond that. Respect is due, because this is what they're going to do. I don't know if he's going to do it exactly this way, but this is kind of the eradication process. Live rock, you start your brand new tank. Live rock is fallow for 6 to 11 weeks. So we're just not going to put anything in here for no fish for 6 to 11 weeks. I guess I could pull that off. Where is it in 6 to 11 weeks depends on the temperature. So if you can peg your temperature at just over or just under 81 degrees, well then it's only 6 weeks. but you better know, man, for sure that your temperature is accurate or you screwed this up and they're gonna be in there anyway. So like, it's really dependent on temperature and the speed of the metabolism of the animal or the parasite. You're also gonna proactively treat for ick, velvet, urinema, brook, and flukes. So we're gonna add a few other things in there, because if you're gonna do this right, you might as well do it really right. These are actually really simple things to do. You add like a couple of dips along the way in the 80-20 process that we talked about earlier. It's pretty easy to do. However, these dips are harsher on the fish and potentially harsher on you as well. And so it is definitely a progress that you're going to make. But anybody can do it. Now, here's the catch. Every coral, crab, snail, algae is fallowed for QT'd for 6 to 11 weeks. So every time you go to the fish store, man, you're gonna buy a coral, you're gonna bring it home, and you're gonna have to go put it in that system for 6 to 11 weeks before you put it in your tank. Who has that kind of impulse control, you know? Okay, and then on top of that, you're going to, if you pick up a coral in 4 weeks and put it in there, the timer resets. You're back to 6 and 11 weeks from there. And now, even if I could do it with a coral, now I got algae problems, I need some snails. Nope, 6 to 11 weeks before the snails can go in there, and they need to be in a fishless system that's stable and healthy for them. This is complicated. All right, guess what? It's got to be 10 feet away from your other systems, because the parasites are so small they can actually attach themselves to the moisture and travel through the air and jump from one tank to the other one, right? So this system can't be anywhere near the other system. And it's best done from the beginning. So if you're saying, oh, I want to do eradication now, that means I got to take all my fish out, I got to treat all the fish, and then the system needs to be fish-free for 6 to 11 weeks and start over. Okay, I don't know, it's possible, but sometimes there's the dreams, there's a reality, and then achievable is in the center. And what I'm trying to do with the 80-20 here is find achievable stuff that like the vast majority of the world would actually do. I think that's what we're talking about today. Caveat to that is eradication perfection is very obtainable in a fish-only system. So if you're only doing a fish-only system, there's no reason you shouldn't do this. Because that 80-20 method I talked about, QT, where you're just doing 4 water changes, who can't do 4 water changes on a fish before you add one every time? Nobody. Everybody can do that. And I'm not adding corals all the time to this tank, so it's just way, way, way easier, the fish-only system. So in that case, I don't know, float and release, I think that's kind of off the table now. But no ick magnets, isolation box, proactive 2 QT. This is super easy. This is the 20%, gets 80% of the results. I'm gonna give you the caveat to that, which is for me, I'm gonna actually do the UV in most cases because I like those fish. And I also like the peace of mind that it gives me, that even if I screw up something or there is a stress event or whatever, that I'm protecting from total outbreak and increase in population of the parasites that are. So freshwater dips is, I'll get to that in just a second. Somebody asked, for everybody listening, there's other dips that you can do, that will set things back. That's better answered inside of in a video that I'll show you in just a second. It's right here, actually. So if you're wondering about what about infections from flukes, brook, urinema, and other methods of dealing with this stuff, it's all here. There's 80-20 quarantine for saltwater with Elliot. Most of what I just shared with you, actually Elliot, taught me. So you're learning from him. You can go learn from him directly if you want to. But this is somebody who cares for animals every day. These are the people that generally provide, the best counsel to me. The people that do it really, really well every single day and experience the most, the challenges and successes. But you can go find this here, and you get to answer that question of there's different ways to get to the same result. All right, nutritive pollution. Perfect is the enemy of great. This one, man, I actually enjoy. This one gets really nerdy, jumps into a challenging subject. It gets into the biology of the animal. You go watch the Master Series. There's actually a video out that's better than that one now. Or you can just say, wherever it is today, I'm just not going to get higher. That's the answer. All right, so same thing, man. Does phosphate and nitrate matter? Let's go to a forum. Let's go debate the hell out of it. Usually it has nothing to do with whether or not it affects the biology of the animals. It's usually about, is it worth caring about? And if I did care about, what do I do? And it just falls apart, the whole conversation. But I don't care, because it's easy. This is so easy, and you're going to agree in a minute. All right, and if you ask any marine biologist, they will 100% agree that nitrate and phosphate affects the animals, the corals. They'll 100% affect how it calcifies, how it's stressed, the zooxanthellae count in it, whether or not it's brown, whether or not it's getting attacked by other algae and other garbage in the tank. There's not a single marine biologist who would tell you that it doesn't matter. So let's just go with them. All right, don't test, don't care. Who's done that? Yeah, you know why, man, I've done that? Is because the first time I did a nitrate test kit, it said XYZ on it, and then I'm like, what do I do? I don't know. Go to the internet starts arguing with me, nobody seems to know the answer. Well, that's the last time I test for that, what possible reason would I test for this? So, and that may work for you, but you're dancing on that dice, better do everything else right. All right, so good. Testing monthly and not perpetually rising. I don't care where you are, whatever the level is, your tank's healthy today. If it's not healthy, then, consider a different option. But if it's healthy today, go test it today. And the only goal now is it's not worse next month. Because if it's worse next month, then it's going to be worse the month after that. And eventually, man, your tank is dead. Where does this happen? Or how many animals do I lose along the way? So, just decide today that wherever it is, that is the message that I get. What I'm testing with that nitrate and phosphate test kit is water quality and nutritive pollution. And I'm just making sure that the tank doesn't get more polluted than it was last month. If you do that, you are in the upper echelon of reefing. Like, you are already so far beyond most people, because most people have no idea what to do with that nitrate test kit at all. And you're just automatically there. All right. That's where we stop. This is that simple. And if I want to change this, it's so simple. I can just feed a little bit less. I can make my protein skimmer work a little bit better. I could do, change what I feed. I just do a couple of different things, and I don't have to drastically change everything. I could change 1 more gallon of water than I was before. It's something really simple. All right, better now. This is 4 stars. We're going to go beyond the 80-20. We're now going to understand organic versus inorganic, food ratios, filtration, and tools of the trade. You're going to learn everything you can possibly learn about this and try to assemble it all into something, manageable and worthwhile. It is not an actual thing you're going to do to your tank. It's a knowledge set that you're going to acquire. And it's really hard because there's so many moving parts to it. But I'll give you a couple of examples of things that you could actually do. So 1, corals require nitrogen and phosphorus. So you require this to make their tissue. They require nitrogen and phosphorus. It isn't a bad thing. But in the wild, most of them are getting it from organic sources. So organic means nitrogen and phosphorus, like that silver side there. It's got nitrogen and phosphorus built up into its tissue. And so when a fish eats it and poos it out, the poo's got nitrogen and phosphorus. The corals capture it. It's the organics, and that's the way that it gets it. Same thing with the pellet food. The amino acids. These corals actually have active transport mechanisms where they, electrically attract, amino acids. They pull it in their tissue, and then they close it, and they open up another to let the amino acid in. And the fish poos. This is how it happens in the ocean. It doesn't mean that it has to happen that way, but we should recognize that's the way it's happening in the ocean, because what's the net result of that when it breaks down 100% is inorganic. That is nitrate and phosphate. That is the broken down leftovers. Corals generally do not utilize this in the ocean. There are exceptions, of course, but generally no, especially healthy reefs. And that's the nitrate and phosphate that we're testing for. So just understand the differences of those is step 1. Another one is think about the food that you're feeding. This is something that almost everybody I talk to doesn't consider at all, which is the ratio of protein to phosphate in your food. And the reason I think of protein to phosphate is because protein contains nitrogen, or it will break down to nitrate. What I'm told is about 16% of the protein ends up being nitrogen. So if you know that, what you can do with that knowledge is, what if my nitrate's going really well? But my phosphate just keeps going up no matter what I do, and I'm using all this GFO and all these hammer solutions. What if you just change your food? And this is an example of that. So the silver sides are 10-to-1 protein to phosphate. So for every little bit of protein I get 10 proteins, I get 1 phosphate. Those shrimp over there, those shrimp are 300-to-1. To give you the scale of what I'm talking about, That means if I fed the same amount of protein from those shrimp over there, that means I could feed an entire month's worth of those shrimp to get 1 day's worth of phosphate from those silver sides. 1 day. That means that in a year of feeding shrimp protein, the same amount of protein, I could do that in 12 days using the silver sides. There's that much more phosphate. So if nitrate's fine, man, and phosphate's just skyrocketing, I could maybe just fix that by switching from silver sides to shrimp. And when I use Kirkland here because Kirkland explicitly states on there that it has no phosphates or preservatives, and that's critical because sometimes these shrimp are actually preserved with phosphate, and you don't want that. So look for that label on whatever you're using. But let's go to something that is more relevant to you guys. Not everybody's feeding that big of food. So here's Formula 1 and Formula 2 from Ocean Nutrition. Okay. One of these is 55 or 51 to 1, the other one's 145 to 1, meaning that the Formula 2 adds 3 times as much phosphate in relation to the same amount of protein. Now you might think that that's bad, and it's almost certainly related to the ingredients, but it's probably because it has so much algae in it, and the algae just has less protein in it than it does phosphate. But the animals actually need that. So you can kind of think about what I'm feeding and how, but let's go one step further. That guy right there with all feathery looking, that's a brine shrimp. The one over there that looks like a shrimp is mysis shrimp. The brine shrimp is 43 to 1. The brine shrimp is 43 to 1, and the mysis shrimp is 520 to 1, right? So if I had a phosphate problem, switching to mysis is the very first thing I might do, right? And why is that? It could be the biology of that the brine shrimp just has more phosphate in it. It also could be because that thing isn't very nutritious to begin with, so they gut load it with who knows what, And so when they gut loaded, they might have had high phosphate and whatever they gut loaded it with. But the point of this matter is now I have this knowledge, I can change it. And you might think instantaneously like the silver sides are bad. And the reason that they have that extra phosphate is because they have a calcium phosphate-based skeletal structure. So when something eats it and dissolves it, it just has a lot of phosphate in it. But it isn't bad if you don't have a phosphate problem. And maybe the inverse is true, where I got phosphate in check, and I don't have a problem with this thing. But nitrate's rising. Well, now I can change the other direction. It's just using the knowledge to try to understand, how do I use the right tool for the right job. I got all this information from Phosphate and Math from Randy Holmes Farley article. It's really old, but there are still some other foods in there you might want to look at. So go check it out if you're really interested in this conversation. It'd be cool if somebody actually updated this with today's foods. But also now understand the tools of trade, just beyond the foods. How do you tune your skimmer? I got to tell you, most people are not doing this right. We did a video on this recently. It's the best we've ever done. So if you want to do that, go check it out. You can also do 10% less food. I don't mean starve your fish, but I mean if you were feeding 20 pellets before, feed 18. The fish aren't going to probably matter, or care about the lat too, but you just reduce the total load of nutrients 10%. It's a solution. Change out the filter socks more often. There's a video on that. Do out your water changes. But the water change might not be about, you don't really care many times how frequently I do it or how big. I care how hard it is. So make it easier. Go buy the right tubes and make it easy. Put a pump on it so you're not just siphoning, waiting a half hour to drain the tank. Put a pump on it that does it in 2 minutes. Suddenly I'm really willing to do that. Do auto water change. Do carbon dosing. Cool thing about carbon dosing, right? Carbon dosing doses carbon, and what it does is take that inorganic nitrate and phosphate, feeds it into the bacteria, and turns it back into organic nitrate and phosphate, which is the types of things that corals eat. So it's recycling it back into a more consumable format. NO3PO4X or the Reef biofuel from Brightwell, or Refugium. Refugium sucks this stuff up as well. Understand the tools of the trade. But I gotta tell you, the best video that we ever done on this was something we did a few months ago called We Want Answers to Phosphate, Nitrate, and Reef Tanks. Can our approach to nutrients end the debate? If you really want to know the nitty-gritty about it, this is the best video I've ever done on it for sure. So this is where we assembled the most information on it. Go check it out. All right, 5 stars now, nutrients, killing it. We're going to select an informed goal. We're going to take all that information that you just learned. You're going to finally apply it in the right way, and you're going to pick a goal range to manage to. And I'm not talking about picking 0.03 phosphate and trying to peg that permanently, because that's impossible. I'm talking about picking a range. I don't care what the range is. Use your knowledge and pick a range that if I went outside this, I would do something about it. I have determined over or under this is bad. You can pick your own range. You can find out whatever you want. What we did is picked inorganic phosphate as 0.05 to 0.15 is an acceptable range for me, and if it went outside that, I would change it. That does not mean if it fell outside that, I'd go dump a bunch of GFO in my tank. I'd just start feeding a little bit more or less. I would maybe change the mysis shrimp. I would do subtle things to get it down and make it stabilize again, and then once it's stabilized, I might actually do a water change just to get it down to where it is. I'm not trying to use all these tools to get it down and then try to get it back up. Just trying to stabilize, and I can use water change as a tool to get there. All right, nitrate, 0.25 to 4.5. These are ranges that I know you can produce a successful tank in. I know that I've done it, I know that my peers have done it, and I can say this with utmost confidence. If my grandma asked me this, I would tell her this is a safe range. This is where I do it. Now, could you do it outside this range? Yes, and the point isn't do what I do. It is pick something that you believe in and do that rather than nothing. All right, now we're going to do perfect. Perfect nutrients is really nerdy, all right? Because now, in most cases, and again, perfect to you might be different than perfect to me, but perfect to me means I'm going to maintain ocean-like organic and inorganic parameters with ideal coloration, zero algae and slime. Let's say that again. I want my water in Minnesota to look like water in the healthiest parts of Australia. I want actually better coloration than you might find in the wild in my tank. I want to beat nature in some ways. And I don't want any algae or slimes and stuff in my tank. That is what perfect looks like to me. All right, and the way we do that is ideal organic nitrogen and phosphorus concentration. Those corals, man, they all have mouths. They're designed to eat stuff. And they may eat it in different ways than others, some very aggressively, some just kind of use slime coats to pull it in. But that's the way they were getting their nitrogen and phosphorus in the wild, as they're soaking all this stuff up. So we're going to mimic the way that they do it in the wild. And part of the reason for that is a copepod could feed coral. It can't feed hair algae. Hair algae can't eat a copepod. Hair algae can't eat a pellet of food. But a coral can. And so that's one of the biggest differences between inorganic and organic is when you have organics that contain these things, they're available to the animals that want to eat them, but not always to all of the pests that want to eat them. Some do, some don't. It also provides essential amino acids and fatty acids. And for those who don't know, the word essential means the things that the coral can't synthesize on its own. They're essential that they get them from somewhere else. To be able to provide for its biology. And so a lot of people have read the comments of coral can produce 90% of its own nutrition. Well, the way that sounds is you gave me 90% of a Subway sandwich and just left out the last 10, which I don't know, I could survive off that, right? But what it really means is you took all the meat out. Still 90% of a sandwich, I guess. But there is none of the essential amino and fatty acids inside of this thing. And so that's what we're providing with these prey, the last 10%. And it's similar to ocean reef. These fish and all the other animals on there are constantly devouring and recycling all of these organics. And they're just changing form constantly. And the corals are catching it, and they're letting it go. And that's just the way that it works. All right. It also doesn't work the other direction, which is inorganic nitrate and phosphate, the stuff you test with your test kit. The reason that the ocean doesn't have a lot of this stuff is a lot of this stuff doesn't get the chance to decay because it gets reutilized by all the animals on there, bacteria and everything else. But what it does, it immediately gets flushed out to the ocean and infinitely diluted. Now there are of course dirty reefs where that isn't the case, but most of the healthy ones, it just completely gets diluted. So there's none of that. And there are reefs that have that, but they tend to look like that. They tend to have a lot of algae and other pests, overtaking them, especially if the pollution is also killing the herbivorous fish. Then it just completely takes over and kills all the animals. All right, now this one's debatable. I can't wait to get roasted. All right, So, of course, the answer is like, how do I actually do all that and apply it? And everybody's gonna have a different opinion on how to do that. I will tell you, for me, the best option that I've used is ZeoVit. Now, I'm gonna give you my explanation as to why. And the reason is because it has ocean-like organic nitrate and phosphate. It has bacterial mulm from pumping all those zeolites. And so what you're doing is you're carbon dosing, and then you're taking the nitrate and phosphate that's in the tank, turning it back into an organic form in the bacteria. It forms a mulm on all of the zeolites. You pump it, and the mulm goes off. The corals eat it. Does this cycle over and over again. On top of that, you're also dealing or feeding Zeo food, which is like an amino acid, the coral vitalizer and stuff, which is like a dissolved organic and particulate organics. And there's other things you can do. And it also has ocean-like inorganic nitrate and phosphate because you're carbon dosing, sucking all that nitrate and phosphate out. And it has zeolite media, which theoretically absorbs things like ammonia. So for me, this here was actually the easiest way, and the system, like there's a system, somebody put this together. And for those of you who don't know, Coral and Zucht is German for coral farm, because that's what they did, is they built a coral farm in Germany, and they used these things, and people wanted to buy them, so they eventually started selling it. And this is the methodology that they used. It's a little mad scientist, though, for me. This is a lot of work, and this is a lot of like input and output to exactly match the ocean. It's really not really necessary. It's also expensive. Those little blue bottles are not cheap, and man, does it take up a lot of time. Like some of those blue bottles are every day, pumping it every day. I gotta do some of them I gotta do every 3 days because I'm trying to mimic ocean perfectly and find this natural balance that doesn't exist in Minnesota. Okay, well, I gotta be honest to you, this still appeals to me, but it doesn't appeal to me today. Because you gotta think about like not just like what you wanna do because it's your hobby, but like right now in my life, I'm thinking about like dance class, I'm thinking about swimming class, I'm thinking about all this chaos in my house, and I don't got time for all that, right? You catch me when I'm an empty nester, or you catch me when I was a single guy, man, this is for me. Like, dude, I really want to do this. I enjoyed it. I like messing around with all the stuff, but there's no question. This is the 80% of time that produces a 20% result. And I can tell you that's Jason's tank. He produced this at a BRS using the ZeoVit method. And I think you did better than 20% results because when you do this, you lower the zooxanthellae count inside of the coral because you're providing so much nutrition in other ways, and you don't have all this excess nitrate. And so the fluorescence and coloration pigments of the coral come out so much better. I think you're producing, if you're super nerdy acro lover, this is awesome. But man, you better have the time, and you better have the time to do it perpetually. Now that doesn't mean you can't take 2 weeks off for a vacation because these are resilient animals. But if you decide I'm not going to do this anymore, expect it to go south. All right, so that's a question about is it worth it? The effort, the cost, and the return. Figure out if perfection is worth it for you in the center of all of that. And there's other ways to perfect and maintain. Those other different ways of doing organic nutrients you could add in. There's other ways to actually reduce all the nutrients. We already talked about them. But for me, it's 80%. It's just test, not rising. That's all you need to do. You're in the probably top 20% of reefers if you just know what your nitrate and phosphate levels are month to month and you're making sure that they're not worse than last month. You're a total different class of people. All right, the rest of it is really nerdy. Get ready for it. Go watch that video I told you earlier. All right, this is the mission though, and now I'll ask you whether or not we've achieved it from the beginning, which is chemistry and elements. A 1 to 7 part system that matches your system. Proactive water changes, addressing the issues that we had proactively. We know what they are, and we're doing a system that solves it. Fishing QT has no ignite magnets, an isolation box, 80/20 QT, and our Nutritive Pollution is just not perpetually rising. Combined with other efforts we'll talk about in the future, does this look to you like if you did those things, that this is relatively easy, and 80% of the people that did it should be here in a year talking about it instead of 10%? Because I think it does. And I'd like to find out. If you think it does, go ahead and use it yourself. But also, share this material with other people because it's the advice that comes from, all of the nerds sitting in this room, watching stuff on, Reefy, and like, this is what we do. And then we share it with people when we learn. Do that. And for part 2, we'll do in New York, and part 3 in California. So this isn't the end of this. We're going to assemble essentially the 9 things that really matter. And for me, I like to share a quote from Kevin Flynn, because I'm a nerd, like Tron. The thing about perfection is that it's unknowable. It's impossible, but it's right in front of us all of the time. And this tank has all kinds of imperfections, but it's perfect to me. Any questions?